Hello everyone. Once again, this is Mihai Algiu, and my guest for this interview, Spencer Campbell. Spencer is the founder of Center for Transformational Psychotherapy in Nevada City, Grass Valley, where we are therapists following the parameters of the mental health system, trauma-informed, and all the rest. Yet we have a bigger umbrella, being inspired and informed also by time-honored traditions of spirituality, of non-duality, Buddhism, Tantric. So we are, let's say, bringing all those wealth of spiritual experience and wisdom to dealing with, trauma, addiction, regular so-called mental health issues. And I'm very honored to have Spencer once again. It's part 3. This is an interview, the series of psychotherapy and non-duality. And feel free to watch part 1 and part 2. And in part 2, we actually delved into using tantric principles as applied to oneself, navigating the inner seeming duality of feminine and masculine within oneself. And this part, actually, I'm very interested to ask you, Spencer, about some concept that you often brought ever since I met you, and seems very instrumental to your approach on working with yourself and others and couples. And you call it the wound of love, the wound of love. And so the whole topic today will be on that. And I add into the bowl, before I give you the floor, is that I know that in modern psychotherapy and psychology, there's this attachment theory. And actually, I know that the person who came up with that initially called it love theory. And then the psychologists and specialists told him, dude, you can't speak like that because you're not going to be taken seriously. So you need to call it something more dry. Call it a attachment theory, an attachment wound. But so I'm happy to see we're coming back to. So yeah, if you can speak about what do you mean by that and how is it connected with psychology means as attachment wound and those early childhood difficulty in bonding or attachment, or when the attachment with the parental figure is disrupted through, how is it connected to all that? Or what do you really mean by the wound of love? And yeah, let's start with that.
Yeah, that's a good place to start. And first I need to give credit to the source of that phrase and really the essential teaching of it, which is from Adidas Amraj, who's a great master. He left his body in 2008, but he's, in my experience, one of the great masters of our era. And what's so profound to me about the teaching, what I found so helpful about it, is it's such a essential description of reality itself, kind of manifest or embodied reality itself, this teaching of the wound of love. And the thing that is so helpful about it for me is to be shown that it's a wound that never heals. And the reasons for that, I mean, there's a few different reasons for it, or descriptions of what it is. And one of it is that nothing outside of ourselves, no other, no thing, or no experience can ultimately or fundamentally allow us to feel love. Also, generally speaking, human beings are limited in their capacity to love. And in this sense, we're talking about, or we're equating capacity to love with capacity to feel as basically being the same thing. So the example I often use is, every parent loves their child in their heart of hearts. but the demonstration isn't always necessarily of love. And what makes that the case is essentially emotional reactivity, which is based in our capacity to feel. So when I reach the limit of my feeling capacity, I become emotionally reactive. And in that moment, by my demonstration, I'm actually not loving. And so in this way, I equate capacity to feel with capacity to actually love. And
so
then
when we reach the, sorry, I will bookmark it. Go ahead.
Okay. And then the third part is that everybody dies. Everything and everyone we love, we will lose sooner or later, in the next moment or 50 years from now. But it's built into the system of lived existence. And so we all know this. Yeah. Deep down, there's a part of us that knows this truth, though very few of us are consciously relating with it. And that's why I describe it, or Narida described it as an aspect of reality that is unchangeable. Yeah, it's a wound that never heals. Typically because if we don't tend to be consciously aware of it, we live on top of it, and then have this essential demand on the other that they relieve us from this wound. Either they make us feel loved or they don't leave us. But it's all futile because it's reality itself. We will lose everything and everyone in the end. And so this is why I found those teachings so profound, is that to know that it's a wound that never heals, that it can't be fixed by any strategy or any practice, and that true freedom or peace involves the ability to transcend it as it is, to learn how to house it in our growing pleasurable association with presence or awareness, which does contain that wound and ultimately permeates it. And so that's what I found was so helpful about that teaching. And then when you really start to sensitize yourself to it and see it, you see that almost all of us are living in avoidance of it in some way. And that so many conflicts in relationship are actually caused by the avoidance of that essential wound. So, and that's what I find to be so profound about it, so helpful. To know that it's not a mistake. Yeah. It can't be eradicated in any way.
Wow, very rich. Let me just paraphrase a little bit, and so what I get from you, yes, it is built in the system. It comes in the experience of having a body, mind, and experience of being alive. It's created by God. The game of every creature here that we love or we attach to, we are going to lose sooner or later. The Buddhist anicca, impermanence, and the wise man faces that, the reality of loss. And then there's this element of early aspect of conditioning connected to when the parent reaches the capacity to feel. When it's the feeling that the experience is too much, then they get into reactivity and they actually switch into unlovingness, basically, and then which creates some hurt in the child and creates this first taste of being rejected or abandoned or something that the adult carries deep down, and then it activates in relationships, and so unconsciously we are trying to not feel it or to solve it. Yeah. And then it is basically unsolvable at the level of finding the ideal partner or finding love outside out there.
And that's I like that you bring in psychology, because you could say that's in a certain way the initial experience of the wound of love, where typically as infants or small children we're wide open, innocent, present, and then our parents by tendency love us imperfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And so we experience them as not being there in some way, or taking out their avoided feeling on us. And so that gives us the first fundamental dip into the experience of that wound. And because we don't have the capacity to manage it or integrate it at that age, just developmentally, it's not possible. We develop these strategies of managing or essentially avoiding the feeling that you could call the ego or the me, the separate self.
Mm-hmm.
But that too is constructed on top of the avoidance of the wound of love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's the initial ouch. The child first feels whole, the golden child, and free, spontaneous. And then I guess by 2 or 3 years old, we start to have the sense of like me as the body separate from the world. And then there's some hurt happens, and then out of that, then the child adapts some strategic personal adaptation with a sense of individual I in it. Of course, the child doesn't think like that, but in order to be in a different way, to get love or to avoid hurt. Yeah.
We develop 1,000 strategies for that. And I would say actually the inception of even the sense of a separate self ultimately comes from the avoidance of feeling. And you could say at the root, it's the avoidance of the survival fear, or this belief that I have to maintain this separate one, that ultimately is just a concept that's constructed by the avoidance of feeling. And so then when we become adults and we become conscious and able to consciously engage in this act of feeling through those layers of avoided feeling, we start to move through that act of separation.
Mm-hmm. To move through the feeling of separation. However, that is like whatever it has the flavor of rejection, abandonment, alone in the whole world, unloved. So somehow that's the actual energy of sense of separation. So it seems like that's the way to go.
And start craving fear underneath all that, certainly.
What can you say it again?
Start craving fear underneath all of that too.
Yeah.
Fear of really the survival need, belief. Not as a physiological, natural response, it's mindless, but as a neurotic, obsessive belief that's oftentimes always running underneath the surface. What's so fascinating is you can take almost all moments or acts of suffering and just 2 or 3 steps, you trace it down and you'll find that it's all on top of this stark raving terror. It's based in the belief in the separate one, and therefore the need for the separate one to survive.
I like that. So 2 or 3 steps go down and you get down to some, I mean, what I knew before I met you, this like, the rejection and abandonment. It's like the most unbearable feeling to bear, rejection and abandonment, which come down to one thing, like abandonment, and which if you take the label out, it's some cluster of sensation. It's like a state of being alone. And then I guess you are saying there's like, usually as a child, if a child is alone, the child cannot survive alone. So it's inbuilt in the species that we can't self-soothe, can't survive alone. So then it's like death, being alone. It's fear of something terrible. I call it.
Yeah.
So this is very early, very deep stuff. Very many layer on top of layer of this. And it seems like our psychology, our attempts of pursuing happiness, they come from this.
Yes.
And to seeming to find stability, to find peace, find okayness, find Huh.
You know, in a certain way, Mihai, like that is even deeper than what we're talking about here, which is the wound of love. And what's so helpful about the wound of love concept and experience is that it has such a significant impact on relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we both work with families, couples, and once you become aware of that in yourself, you see that that's really the underlying cause for almost all relational conflict. You could say that the essential complaint underlying most relational conflict is that hurt my feelings. And that suggests or points to this wound of love that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
If we go deeper with it, that not only am I expecting my partner to make me feel loved and make me happy and to never leave me, yeah, but it's complete, utter impossibility. And it's not resolved through the other. And then we're forced, if we're going to be honest and we're going to be serious about actual happiness, then we're forced to deal with this wound of love that can only be resolved what you could call spiritually or in relationship to consciousness itself or awareness itself. Awareness itself being the only thing that can truly resolve that wound, because it is always already the case, radiantly available, and permeates all feeling, right? In the way that the other can't do. And so this is what we find in our explorations and our work with clients, is that to truly be serious about happiness, if that's actually what we're doing, then we have to include something that transcends the ego system. We have to establish a bodily emotional relationship with awareness in order to address these core underlying wounds.
So you are saying that not the healing, but somehow the transcending without bypassing, the transcending and resolution. Let's say the resolution of the wound of love comes through on one's own, consciousness to allow, welcome these terrible feelings and sensations, and while knowing, like resting as the presence that we already are, resting as that, and being soothed by the presence, and allowing these feelings to devour whatever they need to devour and not to reject them. And they are slowly because they discharge. And then the more there's a shift of identity happens from being the me being devoured or lost to the me being the I amness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know we are slightly using some slightly different terminology, but so that's the way to heal and integrate that. And that I am is God. So actually that's from one angle that we've never been, I remember even we did some work recently, and there was this, the wound of love was that for Mihai was that I'm alone in the universe, alone forever. And that is the cognition coming out of that state, sensation and feeling. But seems like the deeper truth is that actually being alone and unloved is an impossibility, because we are surrounded by God, and we are in God as God, and we are love, and there's love all around us. So from one angle, the wound of love was an illusion.
Yeah, you're right. Like ultimately, it's an illusion, but it's still inherent to like manifest reality. Like the humanness aspect of being unavoidably experiences that. Like there's nothing you can do to eradicate the heartbreak of existence. As my first teacher, Adyashanti, said, all love sheds a tear.
What did he say?
I think he was pointing to that. He said, all love sheds a tear.
All love sheds a tear.
Yeah, because the loss is built into the system of things. There's not a thing we can do about it. But that the wound of that, or the pain of that loss, can be permeated if we allow it by presence itself, and then it's soothed and resolved in that way. And that's why it's necessary, if we're being serious about the realization of happiness, with our clients and just in our own lives, is to establish a fundamental relationship with that living presence, and to turn to that in the face of that unhealable wound. Let that soothe and resolve the wound. And so this is why I say, if we're talking about kind of relational practice, to truly be capable of a mature or happy relationship, both people have to be established primarily in their relationship with presence. The mistake people make is they try to get from the other what they can only get from presence. And then they're upset that doesn't work out.
Yeah.
But if I'm establishing getting it from the other, getting it from presence, then I can deal with the other and deal with all of these human existent things that are unavoidable.
So both people in the partnership, they are committed to getting self-soothing and love from within the presence, which is loving and stable and being nourished, and which is this presence is God. God manifests as this presence. So being soothed, nourished, and held by God. I mean, self, God, whatever, universal consciousness. And then, only then kind of engage with each other and try to work things out. Needs, psychological needs, you didn't, whatever, feelings, needs,
then you're
patterns.
actually free to express things in a way that's helpful, instead of attacking,
blaming,
or dissociating,
blaming.
But we can actually bring feedback, because it's not about becoming then a doormat where a partner can do whatever and we're just passively allowing it. By establishing that primary relationship, that we're then empowered to express to our partners how things feel, where they might be off, to help them. And then it becomes a mutually helpful relationship, fundamentally based in establishing this unconditional relationship with presence or awareness. Now we're talking about a good relationship. It just happens to be incredibly rare currently on this planet. But then because there's this functioning is just happening mindlessly. What the human being is, its needs, its wants, and there's nothing wrong with it. We don't have to fight it or resist it, even the desire to be in relationship. But we're just inspecting the confusion that will make me fundamentally happy, or even could. Then freed from that, I can actually engage with it to make it more to my liking and more actually mutually helpful.
So the premise and the philosophy behind even engaging in relationship is different than what we mechanically engage in from as a completion of myself, or as a solution to my pain, or as a make my life better. Hey, I have something here that surely has to make sense in this paradigm, but in this somatic awareness-based psychotherapies and stuff connected to attachment work, there's this idea that relational wounds only heal relationally. So basically, if there's any early wound connected to abandonment and rejection and stuff like that, and it's going to heal at some point in relation to another being. So they say relational wounds heal relationally, not on the cushion, because many people go on a cushion, meaning like meditate, go by themselves, self-reliance, and then feeling stable and good. But that's good. But then you go into a good relationship, then you get stirred again. So so this made a lot of sense, and with either with a good partner or with a teacher, with a guru or with a therapist. So the client or the wounded person starts to get what they didn't have or something. They start to have a healthy attunement with someone. So this makes a lot of sense to me. It happened to me, and I see a lot of people. So how does this fit in that?
It's seemingly a contradiction, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah,
Because we're saying that the other can't
seems
make
like
us
a
happy.
contradiction.
Then we're talking
Yeah.
about the necessity of a relationship, or actually the truth, or in a certain way to exist is to be in relationship. You know, unavoidably. We could be in the same room, and I can go stand in the corner and face the wall, and I'm still in a relationship with you. This Arida, that when I mentioned, who brought this concept, as far as I know, the wound of love, into human awareness. He had this book called Compulsory Dancing. There's no relationship is compulsory. It's a compulsory aspect of existence. But so, there's relative aspects to that. So there can be relative healing relationally. It's a healthy relationship, or say, often when I was working with teens, when I was just beginning practice, there's this idea that all it took for a traumatized teen was one good adult or parental relationship to be healed. So there is certainly relative help in relationship. In my own spiritual process, ultimately, it's a surprise to me to find myself in a guru yoga tradition, and that also addressed the necessity of relationship. And with in case of the guru, ideally the guru is surrendered into source or the divine, so it becomes an instrument for that to function through them. So you are essentially still relating to the divine or to source. But ultimately, these core things we're talking about, they're still resolved in relationship, but they must be resolved in relationship to presence or source. So they can't be resolved relatively through another. But there is still the paradox of relationship, because how can we say we're in relationship to that which we are, if we understand ourselves to be source, and for everything to be, in a sense, that or one. But because we've been conditioned into a state of separateness, there's a seeming relationship that dissolves itself by our consciously engaging in it. And this is the paradox of relationship with presence. And so in a certain way, it seems to be a relationship, but it's a self-dissolving relationship that dissolves the illusion of separateness.
So they are the relatives. This is they're both true. They're both true, and also, I can get it. What we talked before, like solving it at the level of presence, but also, having of this experience of somebody that is healthy, and then what we didn't have, what the baby didn't have, or the child didn't have, or was missing and developmentally stuck, can come later. They call it in Hakomi, the missing experience comes later, let's say with a therapist or guru, or with relationship of that feeling of belonging finally happening later. But they need each other. It can't just be with another person, because then it's incomplete. And actually, true relationship, successful relationship, is the sense of dissolution between the two. So it's more like the field of the togetherness.
Right. Ultimately, both relating to that same one. So you could say, as a physical metaphor, people in relationship are not facing each other. They're kind of turned towards presence and facing that together, including the other in that field, and then going through the process of dissolving together through the exquisite challenge of relationship, which evokes and exaggerates everything in ourselves we're avoiding and need to feel through anyway to become fundamentally happy, but certainly doing it in the shared field together.
Yeah, so it's interesting that what you said now, that what other great relation therapists say, Terry Real, even Eckhart Tolle, that relationships are people growing machines. So from our point of view, the relationship with another human being will evoke, will scrape out, up and out, any sense of separation that needs to be welcomed and integrated in the presence. So somehow it's needed. Otherwise, we may think we are good on our own, but there's still residuals of the sense of being a separate individual, unloved and alone in our system.
Yeah, and these can be very compelling feelings. You're talking about the feminine dilemma, whether you're male or female, frontal line of being that by tendency feels unloved. Already it feels unloved.
Mm-hmm.
So, generally speaking, our partners will be limited in their full feeling capacity and consciousness. And so they will reenact the experience of not loving perfectly, causing the other to feel unloved. And what happens conventionally then is there's a hurt from that, and then I'm angry at the unloving behavior and I'm wanting to fix it over there. But this practice that we're talking about, what's necessary for healthy relationship is to, in the face of that wound of feeling unloved, is to turn to presence and let presence essentially soothe that experience of being unloved. So I'm not trying to get that from my partner, man or woman. We've often talked about how men, and it's almost less conscious in men oftentimes, that they have this, what I call this hurt little girl inside in their frontal line that feels unloved, feels abandoned, rejected, whatever it is. And so the practice of that aspect of being is to feel loved. The phrasing of it is to feel loved already, which just mean I receive presence into that conditioning of feeling unloved and to let that soothe it. And then by doing that, I feel loved in relationship to source. And then I'm capable of addressing the unloving behavior of my partner, finally in a helpful way.
Yeah, if we can just, I think you already, this is what you just said, but if we can touch on it kind of really crisp without going into detail. Actually, you said the yoga or the practice within this tantric model, the practice of what's the work of the male being and what's the work of the female. You mentioned it, but just to have it like really clear.
Yeah. And if you may take, because we're almost out of time, but I think we can go. Yeah. Maybe we can go into this next time. Yeah. But so as we're talking about, so the feminine practice of relationship is to feel loved already in the way that we're describing, and then on top of that, to vulnerably express how things feel. And to vulnerably express how things feel depends on this practice of feeling loved already.
And to give feedback necessary. To the masculine.
We were talking about our arm, the feminine aspect of the arm needs to tell me how things feel. If I put it on a hot stove, its function is to tell me, ouch, that hurts. And so that's
to express when it's good, when it's not so good, when it's close, when it's far, to give feedback, but from a place of already feeling loved.
Yes, but it's so vulnerable to do that. It makes sense why we all avoid doing it, because typically, historically, to express how things feel, you just risk being slammed, attacked, demonized.
And the unconscious masculine feels criticized.
Yeah. And then we're talking about the quote unquote masculine aspect of practice, of relational practice, is to make the other feel loved. And that's also, there's an esoteric quality or non-obvious quality to that practice, because it's not to run around trying to make the other feel loved, leaving yourself on top of anxiety. Yeah, that's very unappealing. It's what you're essentially doing is through this practice of surrender, dropping out into presence, and then associating and aligning with presence. You're essentially giving your presence. where it's needed, and you become the agent of that, no matter what's arising, no matter how the other is appearing, even if the other is appearing horribly to you or offending all of your sensibilities about what a person should be or shouldn't be, to love through that. Yeah? And then we can see that's an equally profound practice. And it takes a very profound grounding and association with presence to do it. But that is what true, mature relating requires. And so that's
Wonderful.
what we're
Yeah.
you know, inviting people into, you know, with the disclaimer that it is a radical process. I mean, this is why, you know, when we're talking about it, you know, we're amazed to see that it actually requires what you could call awakening, or a fundamental shift in identity from being the separate self and being your thoughts and feelings to being presence itself, because only presence itself is capable of such a practice.
Yeah.
You know? This is not some trivial thing. It's not a superficial thing. Like, you can have some, you know, language things the right way and it's going to be a happy relationship.
Yeah.
Those things are helpful, but they can't touch, you know, these feelings that we're talking about, because of how profound and intense they tend to be.
Yeah.
I'd say they universally are.
I mean, it's hard to navigate this process. You go to a relationship therapist or couples therapist that he himself is not aligned with that, so it's not going to work. So it's just some kind of troubleshooting or improving something or rearranging the furniture in the mind. But let's bookmark this for next time and go more like into what you just described, and more like what's the obstacles to that and what's the way to go for this, achieving this mature togetherness while established in and as presence. Yeah.
Sounds good. Great, Mihai.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Yeah.
Bye bye.